Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Mark Regala and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to episode 11 of Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. Tonight, I'm joined by Mark, my co-host, Regala. How are you doing tonight, Mark?
Wonderful. How about you?
Excellent. Can you believe this is our 11th episode?
It's hard to believe. It really is. When did we start doing this? A few months ago? Every other week recording them?
10 episodes ago is all I know. So
yeah, 20 weeks ago.
Your math skills are much better than mine. So, I think that's kind of wild to think about when we're talking about diving into a lot of these topics and areas that are really kind of pressing today, and appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge and just your willingness to kind of share your own personal experiences with each and every topic that we kind of dive into each week. So, needless to say, very happy to kind of be leading this journey alongside you, my good friend. So, we're talking about a pretty tough topic tonight, I feel like, when we're kind of talking about forgiveness. And I feel like forgiveness is one of those things that people just kind of throw out there pretty often, where it's like, oh, you know what you need to do? You just need to forgive them. It's simple. Like we were talking about tonight, when people are like, hey, you know what? You're really kind of holding on to this. You just need to let it go. It's almost like telling somebody in their active addiction, you know what you need to do? Just need to stop it.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, this wisdom you just brought to my table and dropped in front of me, I never had those thoughts before. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I think that's one of the things that forgiveness is a very tricky and challenging practice to actually really embody. Because what it starts at its core, the way I kind of see it here, is that it first starts with us recognizing that we're all human. As much as we all might believe that we are great, grand, and wonderful, and that we are the ones walking on water, we're not. And we all make mistakes. And I think that becomes a really difficult thing to acknowledge, is that sometimes we do have faults. Or the things that we do and the things that we say and the way in which we say them really do impact other people intentionally and sometimes even unintentionally. And I think that's the part of really when we capture what forgiveness is, it's not just a simple action of saying, you know what, forgiveness, game over, I got it. We're practicing, we're embodying it now. No, it's a series of steps. It's not just that singular commitment to practice forgiveness. And I think that's when we look at, really, there's a lot of data out there and research has been done talking about the positive psychological effects, the physical benefits that come from practicing and really embodying forgiveness. Because it's like, hey, you meet that person, and I think we've all run across people who are just kind of like, I just can't let it go. I am never going to forgive them for what they did to me. And it becomes like this righteous crusade. And needless to say, people sometimes do some horrendous things to other individuals. And I think that's when we talk about what forgiveness is. It's not giving permission. I think that's where people get stuck a lot of times. And like myself too, like early on, before even kind of like diving into what actually forgiveness is at its core and in its practice, was like, that's pretty much saying like, hey, whatever you did to me, like it might have really hurt me and it might have destroyed me. But to say that I forgive you for that means I'm giving you permission for that to have happened. Or I'm like kind of co-signing on that. And that's not what it is. Forgiveness is really saying at its core that I'm no longer going to carry this with me. I'm choosing at this point to forgive you, and I can take a step back and acknowledge like, hey, you're a person too. You make mistakes. Maybe that's not what you intended that day. I don't need to understand your intention. I just need to really embody and practice this so that I don't have this impacting my emotional and physical health in such a damaging way. Because what it ends up doing is it gets in the way of us showing up the way we want to show up. But there's a lot of obstacles and challenges that kind of come our way before we can even really embody forgiveness. And so, Mark, what would you say? Because I think when we talk about forgiveness, like how's that kind of played in your story? And what
Well,
were some of those things that came up that got in the way of actually really embodying that for you?
well, I mean, first of all, you talked about how we're all human. I'll be the first to tell you, I've gotten a lot better at this, but I have a lot of room for improvement. Okay. I mean, that's the human side of me, you know. But I have gotten a lot better, but it wasn't easy to do. As far as what has stood in the way for me to forgive, I mean, obviously it's the obvious pride, maybe some ego, fear. I mean, it's a combination of things. And it's all stuff that you have to work on internally to try to overcome. And for me, at least, it's ongoing. And again, I mean, it's okay to recognize your areas that you do really good at and areas that you need to improve on, and try focusing on improving in those areas to try to be as well rounded as possible when it comes to your recovery. This is an area or this is a subject that it's not an easy one for me to talk about. I'll be the first to tell you, and it's definitely one that I need to improve on. So I appreciate the topic, and I'm going to learn tonight, just like everybody else. Hopefully, that's watching the podcast is going to learn tonight.
Oh, and I like the fact that you kind of mentioned like ego and pride coming up, because I think that reminds me of this saying, right? Like, my ego is not my amigo. Because
it's true.
Somebody got on a T-shirt for me one time. It's like, what are you trying to say here?
You should be wearing that tonight.
We'll have to somehow Photoshop that in. It says just covering my face, and it's just the purple T-shirt that says, "Hey, ego is not my amigo."
But you made that. But here, and you need to wear that shirt, and we're going to get that shirt maybe for the next podcast. But that being said, you made this comment earlier, and I don't know if it's a fear thing or an ego thing or what have you, but it's what you said. By me forgiving, sometimes you feel like you're allowing them to get away with something, or you're allowing them to do something to you, and you got this fear inside that it's going to happen over and over and over again by you forgiving. And that's an area that I struggle with. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you. That's actually something that internally I have felt.
Yeah, it's like that fear that, hey, if I forgive, then I'm opening myself up to more pain here.
Exactly.
And that's terrifying. I mean, because, hey, like, the deepest wounds are those emotional wounds, because those sometimes never heal. And those leave a long-lasting mark, not just on us, but in the way in which we have relationships, the way we connect with other people or don't connect. Because I think that's some of those barriers, right? And some of those big obstacles is saying, like, hey, if I'm going to let this down, because this feels so right to hold on to, which is the other side of it, right? Because you got this strong emotional feeling of like, I can't let this go. And then what? I enter the unknown.
I know what'll happen there.
Yeah.
I mean, when you can't let something go and you have those resentments, I mean, it's kind of like what we talked about in the support group tonight. It's like a cancer festering inside of you. And if you get that cancer festering inside of you, you're going to be subjected to, a potential relapse, on the alcohol or drug side, or, a potential downward spiral or downward trend on the mental health side. So I know I'm cognizant of enough to know, that I can't have that on the inside. But it's the whole processing and working through things in a healthy way with healthy boundaries to be able to do it. Okay. But at the same time, realize that, or make sure that you're allowed, make sure that somebody's not going to walk all over you, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. Because I think that's a key thing here, right? It's kind of like, hey, how do I make sure that I'm protecting myself and I'm feeling safe if I'm going down this uncharted road that I don't know what to expect? And I think that's the part where it's like, hey, how do I kind of build that trust in myself if I don't have it initially? How do I learn to believe that this is genuinely in my best interest and this is a scary journey that I'm going down and I'm not sure where this map is taking me, and I can kind of figure that out as we go down this road. And that's where, I mean, it becomes really difficult to actually go down and take that first step down that path if we haven't first, in a sense, let go of that anger and that resentment, that pride, that fear, because those are things that interfere, as well as saying, you know what, I'm not perfect. I'm going to keep coming back to this because I think that perfectionism plays a huge part in this as well. Because sometimes we've made so many mistakes in the idea that, hey, I got to work this perfect recovery program. So there's no flaws in my game. Nobody's going to ask me anything. They're going to just see it and it's going to be perfect. But that's all driven at internally all this anger, resentment, fear, guilt, shame that's kind of bubbling inside of me. And so that's the part where, hey, if I can acknowledge that I'm human and that I'm going to make mistakes, now it makes it a hell of a lot easier for me to be honest with other people. And if I can have that foundation at the beginning to understand that, you know what, I'm just going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen along the way, and that's okay. Not that I want that, but that's going to occur. And I want us to have a relationship where I feel safe coming to you and we can have that conversation so I can be honest. Because if I can't be honest with you, well, now we're talking a whole different ballgame. Because this is going to go take a totally different spin, right?
And I True. Think... So, in a sense, what you're saying is that, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're human, we make mistakes. So, forgiveness starts with forgiving ourselves.
Exactly.
And then once we work on forgiving ourselves, then we can forgive others.
Right.
I think that's a critical component, to recovery, for sure.
Because that's where it starts with. I mean, you've talked about it numerous times, like, hey, the person that's looking back at you the most in the mirror, who's that guy?
It's not only like some of the mistakes that we made, but I mean, obviously, it's some of the major ones. Mm-hmm. Like the destruction that we cause, because of our usage and because of, us not recognizing early signs of a mental health diagnosis, or maybe not having the knowledge that we even have a mental health diagnosis. And as a result, you're drinking or drugging or whatever, causes destruction in your family, causes destruction with personal relationships with friends, causes destruction maybe with your employer, and you got to forgive yourself because you didn't realize at that particular time that you were sick. And you didn't realize at that time that you were self-medicating. Because I never viewed it as self-medicating until I sat down with a therapist, and the therapist explained everything to me, thoroughly. And I think once you actually start forgiving yourself, because of the path that you went down, that's when the healing really starts to occur, and that's when you can start, forgiving others. But this is just me. I mean, it was hard, and I still work on, forgiving myself and some of the destruction I caused. But to me, there's a vulnerability when you're forgiving somebody else as opposed to yourself. And I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but that's just how I feel on the inside.
So speak more on that vulnerability, because I think you're really hitting on something that a lot of people experience that.
Well, I mean, as an example, I mean, if you're trying to, I mean, if somebody said something to you or did something to you or in your mind caused you to go down a path because of behaviors or because of things that were said, whatever it might be, okay? And you have to have that conversation with them. I mean, you're basically saying, "Hey, I'm forgiving you for saying these things, causing this trauma, whatever it might be. It could be trauma from when you were a kid and verbal abuse, whatever it might be, okay? But at the same time, you're letting him know that you were you were vulnerable. I mean, it
Right.
affected you, and as a result of it affecting you, it led you down this. It 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 helped lead you down this path. It didn't necessarily lead you down the path, but it helped lead you down this path. And as a result, it created a destructive life that you're trying to come out of, and as a result of coming out of it, you're you're trying to you're trying to forgive, you're trying to put aside those resentments, you're trying to live a life of peace, because you need all that because you can't have this cancer inside of you, um, to really catapult you into sobriety and recovery and living a long-term life.
No, I mean,
That's
that's,
just how I feel. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know if if there's a scientific or medical way to explain that, and I don't even know if that's other people feel the same way, but that's just how I felt.
right. No, and I think that was incredible well said, man. Where, I mean, you look at the flip side of forgiveness is what? Resentment, man. So,
Yeah,
and that's what they say about resentment, where it's like, hey, I'm going to drink poison and expect the other person to die. And,
exactly.
and so it's like, hey, look at the cost of carrying this with me. I'm doing all these things in spite of you because of what you did or what you didn't do. And I'm expecting you to feel that punishment when instead it's actually me that's getting punished by myself because of what I'm continually to replay in my mind and relive and re-experience it, which is all those things that makes it so hard when you're talking about like that emotional vulnerability of just saying, I'm gonna drop the wall down and say, I'm choosing no longer to carry this with me because the impact it's having on my life and where is this leading me? And I want something different. I mean, I think that takes power. And that's the more challenging road to walk down than really harboring that resentment.
And what happens if you have that conversation and the individual truly doesn't feel like they did anything wrong and says something to the effect, maybe not necessarily verbatim,
Yeah.
well, I can't help your feeling. I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, you might have just you might be a weak individual
Yeah.
because don't think that hasn't happened because that has happened.
Right. No, exactly. Where it's like, hey, I'm not going to own what I said. I have no reason to. That's a you problem and not a me problem.
Exactly.
And that's where it's like saying, hey, like this forgiveness on the surface, it might look like it's for you, but in reality, it's for me.
Exactly.
It's all about me saying, hey, I'm not carrying this with me. I choose not to harbor this anymore.
And by doing that, you create a peace on the inside.
Exactly.
And that peace on the inside is important and a critical component to your life of recovery.
Right. And I think that's where we start cultivating like that compassion for ourselves, right? And start really caring about the outcome of our own story. Because I feel like so much we're kind of caught up in the thralls of everything going on. I don't care how this plays out. I don't care long term where this leads me. I don't care about the financial consequences. I don't care about my relationship consequences because I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about right here, right now, what happens in this moment. That's it. And that damage and destruction goes a long way. And I think that's where really, if we can acknowledge that big part of that forgiveness is acknowledging like, hey, I'm forgiving myself because I have to acknowledge that, I really impacted other people in a way is not consistent with my character, as well as recognize that, hey, I might have sold myself short too. And I think that when I say that, that's the thing that kind of jumps out to me in my own head. Because for me, the biggest thing that I kind of like built resentment towards myself and kind of like even towards family somewhat was just like growing up is always like this huge push into sports. I love sports, don't get me wrong. But like this is who you are, this is what you do. And then having injuries and not reaching kind of like the level that I expected to reach or was like kind of like laid out for me there. That built so much resentment towards myself that I felt like I had really done such a disservice to myself and I had squandered all these opportunities and whatever financial commitment my family had made and I'd let them down and other people. I just felt like an overall failure.
Sure.
And so that's where we talk about like that resentment, like that self-forgiveness piece of acknowledging and saying, hey, this doesn't define who you are as a person. And that was like powerful for me to really kind of acknowledge and really harbor like that compassion and that empathy for myself, saying, hey, like the reason I'm reacting so strongly is because like I really care about this. And it's okay to really care about something, because anything that we care about, if it doesn't go according to plan, we're going to have a pretty strong reaction to that because we're emotionally invested. It's like being in a relationship with somebody and they say, hey, thanks for the 16 years, but peace out, bro. I'm good. You're just like, all right, need me to help you pack? We're good. I mean, then if I'm having that kind of reaction, it's telling me that I wasn't really emotionally invested in that relationship.
Correct.
And so I think that's where sometimes what becomes one of the most challenging parts of this is just that emotional reaction we have as we start going through this process, because it means kind of pulling back the layers and seeing, hey, these emotions are pretty raw still. If we didn't allow that healing and give it the needed attention that was necessary at those times.
And then you're going through that, with sober, so now you're feeling feelings for the first time in a long time, and it's very uneasy to go through, and it's a process to go through, and it's not easy to go through.
Right.
But by going through it, it definitely makes you a much stronger human being on the other side, and a much more honest human being, a much more transparent human being, just all around. But don't it's not easy, that's for sure. But it's a necessity, to catapult, you into the recovery world.
All right, that makes you a genuine person. It's like, hey, you make mistakes too? Welcome to the party. Right? Like we all make mistakes. I know.
And then you're gonna have those conversations with people that, you recognize your mistakes to them, and they want to remind you of your mistakes too.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Oh, and I think that's all part about how we respond to it. Because I think there are people that are going to have a really hard time. I've had people like that. It's like every time you see that individual, you know what's coming. You know what conversation is going to happen. And it's like, hey, like this sounds like this is really important for you to have this conversation. And I'm wondering how much longer would you like to have these talks, right? Because it's like, it's not about you in that moment. It's about that other person. That other person is really kind of saying that they need this. And if we've done our work and we've acknowledged what we've done, we've made amends with ourselves, with other people, we're practiced that empathy and saying, hey, I genuinely am concerned and care about my emotional well-being as a person. I am not taking a one down approach where I'm going to be a carpet for everybody to walk on here. And I'm a person too who has values. I have respect. I have boundaries. And if there are things that are not appropriate for us to be talking about, we're going to have that conversation, right? Because it's like, if I don't forgive myself and I feel like, you know what, they are so entitled to this, I need to be punished for what I've done, I'm such a horrible human being that needs to be just like smited, then it's going to be hard to assert and hold those boundaries and acknowledge what's being brought in a way that's going to be constructive versus just like emotionally reacting. And I think that's where that compassion practice is so powerful, because it helps us take a step back from our initial reaction and say, what's going on with this individual that's causing them to respond this way?
Correct. And I kind of referenced, the fact that people want to remind you of your mistakes and so forth. I mean, how I reconcile that, or how I look at that individual is, and I don't mean this in a negative sense, I think they have an ignorance when it comes to addiction or alcoholism, or an ignorance when it comes to mental health. There's no education there. They truly don't understand it. And I think, in my mind, if they truly took the time to educate themselves and understood what was going on, in my mind, they would feel very differently about it. But there's just some people out there. I mean, just society has ignorance when it comes to this. Still, it's gotten a lot more attention. It's gotten better. Conversations are now happening at the dinner table about mental health, alcoholism, and addiction. But still, as a society, we have a long way to go.
Right.
And I think as a result of it, there's still a lot of people that don't feel comfortable talking about it. And you don't talk about it, you don't express your feelings, like we're talking about tonight. You know, that's just like a cancer festering inside of you. You got to be honest, you got to be transparent. You got to tell people how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, whether it's a positive reaction or a negative reaction, you can't control that. All you can do is control the controllables. And try to get it out there. And my, I'm thinking about one person in particular right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to respect their privacy.
Yeah.
But when they say hurtful things to me about the things that I've done in my past, one, I say, you're speaking of somebody that no longer exists. This is me now. And two, I look at them as there's an ignorance there. There's a lack of education. And as a
Right.
result of it, you got that stuff spewing out of their mouth. They took the time, like I said, to educate themselves. I'm quite certain that they would be communicating a little bit differently.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's
how I justify it, at least.
Yeah. No, totally. Because it's like, hey, like you're giving them grace in the sense of like, hey, you're doing the best you can with what you have to work with at this time.
Yeah.
And if you had other information out there, you would choose to make a different choice in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like when we're talking about like who's that person that's going to be in your corner and like how and what about those people who really still have a hard time kind of letting it go and really continue to bring it up. And I feel like that's something as just individuals as a whole, when we've done things, cross lines, and not really showing up the way we intend to show up. And so we've built this up in our own head now because of these actions, these choices. It's sometimes like we have like two competing voices in our own head. And I don't know about other people, but I know a lot of times my brain does this awesome thing where it loves to highlight all the mistakes and flaws that I make. And so it's like awesome. It's like incredibly like auto-correcting me as I'm talking. It's even happening right now, which is great. So that's one of those things where if you're kind of, and I kind of like reference this in my head to kind of like when you're learning how to play sports or you're learning a new skill or tool, playing an instrument, what kind of coach would you want to have? Would you want to have somebody who is like, a drill sergeant and really just kind of getting on you about every mistake, every flaw, really harsh, critical, judgmental, shaming? That's not really going to really, motivate you to try really hard.
No.
Because that's really kind of just saying, hey, this part of you, or you as a whole, you're unacceptable. And being unacceptable is immobilizing. That keeps you stuck in the very thing you don't desire. Or would you want a coach who's kind of like, hey, you know what? We're doing something different here. I know this is something that's kind of outside the norm, and you might not be the most familiar with this, and that's okay, because we're going to do this together. I'm going to kind of guide you, give you some tips on what might work, and we'll kind of figure out together how this can work for you, right? Like, obviously, the second coach is the one that we're choosing to vote off the island here, and we're going with first, right? No, we're going with the individual who is treating us like a person, like as a human being who's worthy of respect, compassion, and there's that emotional investment in it. And I think that's when we talk about like healing and really not letting this past in these experiences or even our current relationships and patterns that are going on right now hold us back. We begin to let this go. And it's when we fill our lives with things that we really want to have present in our life.
Yeah, it's just like, and we talked about this again in the support group that we just got done facilitating. But, like, I mean, before everything happened to me, I was a judgmental person.
Mhm.
Okay. I would see somebody on a corner, let's say an addict, and I'd be like, God, what the hell is wrong with that individual? How did, they're asking for, money to supply a habit. I mean, I was terrible. Now I become much more of an empathetic individual. I see somebody on the corner, I think to myself, my God, what the hell happened in that person's life that led them down that path, that got them to this particular situation where they're, standing on a corner asking for money, either for
Yeah.
food or, God forbid, to supply a habit or whatever it might be. That's how my brain has shifted in this. So, like, when I start talking about forgiveness, that's kind of the mindset that I have is I try to put myself in that person's shoes, why they did or why they acted the way that they did. And I try to get an understanding of why they did or why they acted what they did. Not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm trying to put myself in their shoes to see, to just try to justify and get some peace inside me as far as why they said or what they did what they did. And
Right.
I'm thinking about very specific situations, whether it's professional or personal. Um, and, there obviously was some separation there, both personally and professionally, with my employer and, with people that were near and dear to me as a result of the path that I went down. And I mean, I didn't understand it at the time. I'm like, why is this happening? Why are they leaving me? Why are they leaving me in a time of need? But honestly, I look back now,
Mhm.
they made the right decision. I mean, I was on such a destructive path, and I was making the wrong decisions. And, they held on to me in some instances, maybe longer than they probably should have. So they gave me more than enough opportunities to kind of straighten myself out, So I don't have resentments and I don't have, anger and I don't have, um, I don't, I don't even know if I can use the word forgive because I understand where they were coming from,
Right.
you know. And honestly, by them doing what they did, it kind of helped me be where I'm at today. And I see that now, but I didn't see it at the time, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
So, I forgive. I forgive the people that have left me that I love dearly, that I have long term relationships with. I forgive the employer that let me go after years of service because it had to happen that way in order for me to be here today. And I reconciled some of those relationships, but not all. I mean, I think it's pretty well documented. I think I've talked about this before, and you and I've talked about this offline. And my kids, I still don't have a relationship with my kids. It's been 6 years, basically, since I've really seen them or talked to them on a regular basis. Um, but I get it. I understand. And I have faith. Knowing that if I keep doing the right thing,
Mhm.
that I've already forgave them. I just never had a chance to actually say, but I want them to forgive me. I just never had a chance to have that conversation. But I have faith that when the time is right, those conversations will happen and relationships will be restored. But in the meantime, I got to keep living my life, doing the right thing, living a life of service. Basically just doing everything that I'm doing now. Can't let it get to me. Because again, if I let it get to me, it's
Mhm.
going to be a cancer inside, and that can lead me down a dark path. And I don't want to go down that path.
Right.
So sometimes you forgive people, and you never even have that conversation with them because you can't have that
Mhm.
conversation with them. But you still need to do it for your soul, for your heart.
Mhm. No, exactly. Because you're kind of looking at you painted this picture of just like a full transformation,
Yeah.
and just the way it impacts just your overall well-being here. And you're just like, it's almost like coming to a peace with this,
Yeah.
acknowledging like, hey, what do I have control over? What don't I have control over?
I mean, sometimes you can have that conversation because unfortunately, the conversation that you need to have, that person's no longer here.
Yeah.
But you still have to come to peace with it, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened in my life for sure. But you can't let it fester. I mean, you can't have these resentments. You can't because it's just going to lead you down a path that you don't want to go down.
Yeah. I mean, your inner system's on high alert constantly, ready to just recognize any perceived threat. So it might misinterpret that data, but it's like the cost is, hey, you're depriving yourself of some peace. Because as you're talking about this and you're sharing it, there's almost like this peace that's been made where it's like, you know what, like when the time is right and it's all presented and it aligns, then this can occur. And until that day comes, I'm okay with that.
Because I know I've done everything
Yeah.
that I possibly can. And then some, in my opinion.
Right.
Okay. And honestly, and this might sound corny and I apologize if it does, but through recovery and speaking at the hospitals and so forth, I lost relationships with 4 children as a result of the path I went down. But in all honesty, I mean, I forged relationships with so many young men and young women that came from broken households that don't have a father figure in their life, that are battling various addictions and mental health issues and things like that. That I feel like I went from 4 kids to 100 kids. Put it that way, and that soothes my soul.
Yeah. You're really able to impact a lot of people out there in a really positive way.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible.
But you made a comment earlier, and I want to piggyback on that about the 2 voices talking in your head. I always, and maybe I'm going to show my age here, I always reference like the old cartoons, where they would have like the little devil on the one shoulder and the little angel on the one shoulder. And I've used that analogy so many times. I mean, sometimes it's like that. You got this person telling you everything you've done wrong, and you got this person telling you everything that you're doing right now. You got this person telling you, "Hey, it's okay to have a drink," and you got this person saying, "No, you don't want to go back to that life." I mean, it's constant, and it's always making the next right decision. As long as you make the next right decision, things are going to be okay. You listen to the voice over here one time, things can go away pretty quick. That's why that honesty, transparency, having these open conversations is so important. So important. And sometimes it's difficult subject matter. Sometimes it's not easy conversations to have. But in my opinion, no conversation is off limits. And there's nothing wrong with being brutally honest, okay? Because that's what recovery is about, is being brutally honest. And you might have a disagreement because you're being brutally honest. But I guarantee you this, the person you're being brutally honest with is going to respect the fact that you're being brutally honest. And even if you disagree on a certain subject matter, it's okay. You got what you needed to get out. They needed to get what they needed to get out. At the end of the day, you shake hands and go grab a bite to eat or something. Go catch a movie or go to the gym together, whatever it might be.
Right. And I think that's the part where it's like, hey, I'm not going to carry this with me. It's just we're just gonna squash it here, and it's okay.
Yep.
And I think that's where we're kind of talking about just like how powerful forgiveness is in recovery, on our lives, on our emotional well-being, our physical and emotional health. I mean, it's just something that I feel like is so, I don't know, it doesn't get the attention it really needs when we're talking about just really how uplifting and powerful practicing forgiveness can be in recovery. And I think that becomes one of those places that we can get stuck because it's, again, we talked about earlier, if I'm forgiving, am I giving permission to that? And that's not exactly what it is. It is saying I'm choosing no longer to have to carry this with me, and I'm choosing to value and honor myself in a way that I want to really learn how to treat myself in a way like I care about the outcome of this story here. And in order to kind of have this outcome go in a direction that I'm hoping for, and that's consistent with the person that I am, I don't need to carry this with me any longer. I think I've suffered enough. And so, Mark, I appreciate you sharing your personal experiences about just the power that forgiveness has had in your own journey, in your own life, and just how you're learning how to kind of take that step back and really acknowledge and practice that compassion, not just for yourself, but for other people, to understand where they're coming from and why they might be responding in the manner in which they respond.
That's just growth. That's just growth as a human being. You know, I mean, it took me 50 years to get to that point. I should have got to that point a hell of a lot quicker. If I would have got to that point a hell of a lot quicker, maybe I didn't go down the path I go down. But it's not what it could have, should have. It's where I'm at right now, moving forward. And that's all I can control. Control the controllables, and that's what the focus is, moving forward. That's where everybody's focus needs to be, moving forward.
Right, and I appreciate the fact that you kind of went down that path, and you're here today, man. And you're able to kind of share your wisdom and your knowledge, because not everybody has that opportunity.
I know I know a lot of people that unfortunately don't have that opportunity, and it's sad.
And so that's where, hey, anybody listening tonight, whatever time, day, place you're at, if there's somebody or something that you're kind of carrying with you that's really impacting you, taking up a lot of mental real estate, that's having a hard time kind of letting go, really would encourage you to kind of look at and explore the power of forgiveness and how that might potentially help you grow and move in the direction that you'd like to see your life take at this time. And so again, thank you everybody for tuning in. We are going to be talking about next on our podcast for episode 12 here, the topic of a recovery lifestyle. So, I mean, it goes back to the old adage, right? Like, hey, recovery's easy. Just change everything. So we'll talk about, I know, I heard that one time, like, that's great. And then I started echoing it. And I remember working in a group, and I shared it one time because somebody's like, oh, I'm just going to change this one thing, this small tweak, and everything's going to be great. I'm like, oh, yeah, have you heard this? And I share it. They're just like, I don't get it. I'm like, yeah, awesome. So again, we're happy you're all joining us on these discussions. These podcasts will air on the 15th and the 30th of each month, so be sure to tune in. Mark and I are open to comments and suggestions, so feel free to go to our website at namidupage.org/podcast. Again, namidupage.org/podcast to connect with us. Any wardrobe selections, I mean, again, feel free. Mark was referencing that earlier. We got the Ego is Not Your Amigo t-shirt that will make an appearance one of these episodes. So continue to stay tuned in for that day and that time. So I'll try and get you one as well, Mark, in a medium. Don't worry. I know your size. So
if you get it, I'll wear it.
Awesome. As always, Mark, it's a pleasure doing this with you. And again, everybody, thank you for joining us this evening. And we will see you on the next episode.
Yep. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.